online platforms like Submittable writing too. So, and if you guys have any questions, our presentation, feel free to reach out, share some um, personal things as well. Feel free to do that.
There's an open forum, so if you guys want to, just so you just want to talk about your own processes while I'm going over it, do you want to have the stick?
Yeah,
have the stick. All right, go ahead on ahead. We did that already.
Yeah. Right, so both of us actually are graduate students from my graduate training here together, which is pretty convenient because it's easy to get along. We both happen to be writers as well, so that's why you were interested in presenting to the just college student group. You guys are artists yourself, so I'm sure you have a lot of inquiries for the writer. How you can use your skills for the future.
I think also we don't cover every genre, but we do cover a wide range. Like for example, I'm into more world building, science fiction, and more expansive universes. And if you also do more classical literature, more literary fiction. I guess you want to describe it yourself.
Yeah, yeah. So I focus on literary fiction and nonfiction. Yeah, as graduate students, we sort of use our writing skills towards our empirical foundation as well, which is very helpful and gives you sort of an edge compared to other students who may not have such a strong writing foundation. So make sure to always keep yourself motivated, knowing that you have an edge.
One request from Zoom. If you guys could come in a little closer, just speak a little. Yeah, so you're a little louder to them. Thank you guys. Okay. I mean, you can. Thank you. A little towards me.
So, at least for me, the creative process is a process of turning raw imagination into something positive and that can be experienced by others. We all have a story in our head. Sometimes we build that for years, but if you can't get it on paper or in some medium, it'll just say daydreaming. Some people like the daydreaming. I've heard some people say that they were completely neural authors, right? Everything exists in their head, but I'm sure you're here because you want to write something down. And for me, that creative process is cut down into three subcategories: exploration, research, and cutting. Also, I want to stress this is not a linear process. This doesn't have a beginning and end. The book ends when you publish it. If you're writing in a bigger universe, it never ends. But this is something you'll be doing throughout your writing process, not necessarily in this order. Quite frankly, they're layered on top of each other. You're going to be doing this all at once. But this is, for the sake of brevity, I've cut down to three subsections. The first one, and my personal favorite, is exploration. The exploration of your universe, which is where I come from, is science fiction, and science fiction and fantasy, I should say, is the most important part. When you're writing any characters, you want to know the universe they're set in, the world, what they're doing, what people are like, what people think. That can be anything as large as Middle Earth that Tolkien wrote, or it could be someone's neighborhood in Midtown Manhattan. But you want to know the feelings of it. You want to know why people think the way they do. What's the culture of it? Where is the inspiration coming from? And even knowing details about your characters and don't necessarily come up in the story helps to make those characters more alive, at least to me. I know a lot of small details. I know their height. I know their preferences. I know a lot of their history and things like that, which makes them more real to write about. That I'm not just writing a character in that scene. I'm almost writing about a real person. And I say they tell me who they are. And I'm then putting a full person in the scene, even if you're not putting all that detail down. It's better to know who they are. I'm sure many of you have gone through that already. The exploration part I've also broken down. There's brainstorming and note taking, which is brainstorming is a polite way of saying daydreaming. And you also want to do note taking. Note taking, it sounds kind of obvious. Of course, you take notes and you daydream about all this kind of stuff. But when I say note taking, I mean when an idea comes into your head, you write it down immediately. You don't say, I'll do it later, or I'll remember. That's wonderful. If you have the greatest idea and you don't write it down, you didn't have the idea. I've been taking notes, I think, since 2019. Even if I had it here, I'd show you. It's almost a book in length itself. But sometimes I go through and I'm reminded of things about my characters that I forgot, or concepts that I forgot, but I'm glad I haven't written down. And I'm going to be quite honest with you, at least from my own creative process, and I'm sure you'd agree too, Shamsher, sometimes those notes can change the whole story. There's also, this one is a little more fun, is the short story and flash fiction. Sometimes if you're having a rush in writing, it helps to write something else. It can be free form, it can be with the characters you already have, it can be things set in that universe, which is again my experience, but any form of writing can benefit from this. I mean, mostly creative. You can that also use this to explore characters. For example, if you have a character who's more, a Slayer type character, for lack of better words, that goes out there hunting monsters and all that kind of stuff. The classic fantasy hero. Write him on a different story. Write him in a tavern with friends. Write him with his family or things like that. Or if you have a character who is more of a timid romantic, put them in a situation that's dangerous, something they wouldn't normally be in, just to learn different reactions, different aspects, characters, different parts of their personality, which goes back to what I was saying earlier. You have to know them, not just as they are in that linear story that you're writing, but know them as full, real people, so it's easier to write about them, so that you have a lot of versatility with the character, a lot of versatility with the concept, and a lot of different ways to explore their personality, make them more real, which is something I'm going to hammer home a lot. Also, there's exploring other mediums. This is something that I have found helped me tremendously, and it's not something you think of typically with writing. For me personally, that was drawing, and I've learned an unbelievable amount of my characters by drawing them. That seeing them informed me how they looked, what they wore, and then that actually later informed their personalities, which is, again, why I say characters almost tell me who they are. I don't create them. I know that's a very, cliche, but that's true with how I feel. Oh dear. I think two more. So, the next stage is research. Now, research actually can be an interesting stage in of itself, and this one will be more beneficial for other types of writing too, outside of the creative. Because when you do empirical writing, scientific writing, you're going to want to have good sources and also be a stickler for authenticity. Just being a stickler for authenticity in general is useful. But in my case, research is like the same. It goes into exploration. They're really brother and sister, or we even think of it as the backbone to exploration. You want to know actual facts about the characters and things you're writing about. If you're writing a fictional universe, you want to know about real cultures. Also, if you're writing about a real culture, you want to be able to express that culture in an authentic way, so you don't sound like a schmuck. But this can also be enjoyable, but you learn lots of different things. You learn lots of different fun facts. You have to clear your internet history a lot because you learn a lot about poison. So that's my case. But in general, though, you don't want to get too carried away with this because some people do. And I'm guilty of it too. You end up researching and then you write a sentence and the day goes by. So this should definitely be in the writing, but it shouldn't take up the whole writing time. It should be very specific things. And as a tip for me, at least, especially when you're naming characters, do not just go to the baby list and go to the first few because all your characters' names are going to start with A, B, C, and D. This does happen sometimes in the beginning. You want to mix that up a little bit. The next part is not necessarily everyone's favorite, and that's cutting. If you're writing a creative story or really any kind of writing whatsoever, you're going to have to be willing to cut. I've heard one author say that you have to be willing to part with your babies, because some scenes you're going to love, they're going to be beautiful, they're going to be well written, beautiful prose, they're too long, or they don't fit with the direction of the story anymore. I think actually I went through this with my editor just a month or two ago. I wrote this tremendous scene. I thought it was brilliant. It's like this big long combat scene, and she looked over it and she said it was overkill. And then I read it, and it went from being from like 2.5 paragraphs to a sentence, and I realized the sentence achieved the same thing without taking you out of the flow of the story. So like before, it was just too long, and people would probably lose interest. But again, that's very subjective. You have to know when to do it yourself. There's no way I can come and tell you what's correct, or anyone can tell you what's correct. It's very to the taste. But there's also cutting is also a good time to start sending out to beta readers. So you want to give this people you trust. This is sort of the editing stage. Again, as I said, this is non-linear. This happens as you're writing. This isn't something you wait till the end. You can do this sort of in layers. But you want to start sending out, see what people think. Make sure you keep your target audience in perspective, which is going to become very important for publishing. When you go to publish, you want to be able to give your elevator pitch. You want to be able to explain your story. You want to have that audience in mind, so when the agent sees it, he knows exactly where to go to. that they know exactly who they can market you to, and that you can do this 1, 2, 3. Because unfortunately, even though I love the creative side, this is a business, and though I'm not published yet, thankfully Shamsher is, and he can take you through the publishing a little more effectively than I can.
Yeah, so basically what Gary is talking about in regards to writing with the market in mind, that is actually an integral component to writing, right? Because how many of you are interested in publishing? Right? You want people to read your work, and yes, it's a very therapeutic, cathartic art to write for yourself. The end goal for most writers is they want to share their work. They want people to read it, enjoy the work, learn from it, whatever it may be. Right? That is where the technicalities come, right? So there's a lot of different avenues for sharing your work. Like there's publishers, for example, indie publishers, brick and mortar publishers, and then there's also self-publishing, which is a growing medium in today's digital age. And I'm going to go through all of these. I'm going to share my own personal experiences publishing with an indie publisher, the advantages, disadvantages, and why big name publishers are usually have a, I would say, a pre-step process that includes agency, right? And a lot of writers, unfortunately, young writers, aren't familiar with how to contact agents, how to get in touch with agents, build in relationships, etc. So I'm going to go through that. I'm going to give you some resources that you can use. And then I'm also going to talk about literary journals and how you can find platforms online like Submittable that basically open the door to thousands of online journals that you can submit flash fiction to, short novels, even full-length novels, and it's people online that will give you feedback, that will give you prize money for it, whatever it may be, and I'll actually go to the website and you guys can see for yourself. So it's really beneficial in terms of contests. Then I'm going to briefly talk about why you should have a website or an online platform to basically advertise yourself as a professional. All right, so the first part is literary agents, right? So who knows what a literary agent really is? Before I go on, can anybody really describe what is, what is the purpose of a literary agent? Or what you might think a literary agent might do for you? Yep,
I know like an acting agent can also do writing jobs too.
Exactly.
And they filter it.
Mhm. That's exactly what they're. They're basically managers in a way, right? Because if you look at today, there are thousands of writers in New York alone, right? So getting published with a competition with thousands of other people, it's going to be an incredibly long, incredibly thorough, almost demoralizing process because you probably won't even hear back for many years, right? So that's where agents come in. They basically help you get in contact with big name publishers, and they basically simplify the process, right? So, and ideally they are your partner, they're your supporter, they're your believer, and they're an honest friend because at the end of the day, they're only going to support you. If an agent says they're going to accept your work, it's because they honestly believe in that work. And they very rare that an agent will take on an author that they don't believe in the work, that they don't like the work of, right? So finding a literary agent is usually the most important step as it, like I said, helps contact publishers. Uh, and I'll get into the publishers later on, like someone like Penguin Classics or Dover. They don't usually speak to individual authors. And they're also your advocates. They're basically going out there, they're doing the hard work, they're advertising you, saying this author deserves to be published, right? This author, you can trust me, I'm a verified agent and I'm representing, for example, I'm representing Gary and he deserves to do that. That's basically what an agent does. At the end of the day though, you have to remember that agents are still in the world of business, right? Although they're in the literary world, although they are artists themselves and they work with artists, they still work with the market in mind, right? So even if they do like your work, if they don't see it marketable, if they don't see that it can make a lot of money, they will be hesitant to take it. Right? So it's like a double-edged sword that yes, you should find an agent who appreciates your work, but you also need to find an agent who is confident in being able to advertise, right? Like as someone, I've been sending it out to, I would say about 20, 25 agents so far, my most recent short novel. And although I've received a lot of rejections saying how much they enjoyed it and how much they admired the writing and the characters, etc., they said they didn't know how to represent it in the market today because it's just something that's not going to be very sellable, right? So you have to keep that in mind as well when you submitting to agents. And let me actually go to this database, which is going to give you an insight into how you can contact agents and learn about how agents basically ask for different types of submission queries, right? So, for example, this website is called Poets and Writers 15 Forward. It's a database for a bunch of literary agents that are found mostly in New York, but literally all across the country, right? So, for example, I'm going to click on Henry Dunn. Right now, it opens up to a second page that shows his address, that shows the number, website, email, and then it also says accepts email queries, interested in representing autobiography, memoir, etc. Clients included, and then these are some notable authors that you might recognize. When you click on the website, it takes you to the actual agency website. I'm sorry, can you see? Okay. All right, so on this actual agency website, it gives even more information for the source of authors that they represent, right? The different agents that work for this agency and what each agent focuses on. Like, for example, Henry Dunno focuses on working with authors who write literary fiction, historical, commercial fiction, nonfiction, right? And then this differs as you go down the list. Each agent has a specific genre or a specific type of author that they work with. And then you can go to submissions, and it gives you a quick overview of what they look for when you attach a submission. Usually they ask for some sort of cover letter that explains your story, that explains your biography, like who you are as a writer, and what you expect from the agent. So this, I would definitely recommend going through this website in your own time and just going through the list and seeing which agent you think is a good match for you. Oops. Okay, there we go. All right. Now, who's heard of Penguin Classics, Dover, and Corbin? They're big name publishers, right? These are the sort of publishers that people dream of publishing with, and this is what people really look forward to. Unfortunately, they don't work directly with individual authors, and that's why it's so important to have an agent, because the publisher will straight up decline any submissions from an author. They'll say, we don't want to work, usually they don't even communicate with the author, which is the funny part because they're using the author's work to make money. But it makes sense too, because if you think about it, there's like tens of thousands of submissions from different authors. The publisher's not going to be able to look through. So the publisher, like Penguin Classics, they have a select few, probably 100 agents that they truly trust, and they listen to whatever the agents bring them for sorts of authors and the sorts of works that they want to publish. So that's the biggest difference between a publisher and an agent, is that a publisher actually distributes your work, and an agent helps you get in contact with the publisher. All right, so publishers provide an expedited process for sharing the literature that ideally cover expenses surrounding advertising, printing, and listing. So this is the difference between self-publishing and publishing with an actual publisher, whether it be indie or big name. Is that when you self-publish, you are taking care of advertising, you're taking care of printing if you want physical printing, you're taking care of listing it on various websites, and a lot of the time that costs a lot of money, that costs people, costs contracting, things of that sort. So that's why people use publishers, is because they basically expedite that process, right? So your end goal should be getting in touch with the publisher, getting in touch with agents for that reason. For example, in 2017, my short novel, Starting Its Form, was published with Black Rose Writing, which is an indie publisher. Now, indie publishers don't usually work with agents because they're such a small firm. They'll work with authors directly. And there's a lot of disadvantages with that because they don't usually have the same financial backing as a big name publisher. So they can't help you as much with editing. You usually have to take care of editing yourself. You usually have to take care of advertising yourself, things of that sort. But the benefit is that it shows up on various websites that otherwise you wouldn't have access to. for example, because of the indie publisher, they were able to list my book on Amazon and create my own author profile, which I actually had no idea about. And they did that themselves, right? So this showed up. It's not in contract anymore. That's why it's not available, but it's still listed there. And this was because I signed up with an indie publisher. And then it also showed up on some random European book site that I've never heard of in my entire life. But because they were in contract with the indie publisher, they listed this book, and it even got a review from someone that I don't know. Right, so this is the benefit of working with actual publishers and agents, whereas if you self-publish, you don't have those sort of benefits. Unfortunately, there are also something called vanity publishers, right? Now these guys, they prey on enthusiastic writers, so you have to be careful with vanity publishers. Do you guys have an idea of what a vanity publisher might be? So,
Going off the word vanity, as like someone who doesn't
Yeah.
have the perception.
exactly, yeah, they're capitalizing on your enthusiasm to publish, right? So let's say in Google you type in publish your story. There'll usually be a link that says add, publish with this publisher. Now, if it says add, that's already a red flag because no notable publisher will actually advertise themselves because writers will come in so they don't have to advertise themselves and say, oh, we're a publishing house. But the best way to recognize a vanity publisher is if they ask you for money, right? If they ask you to send them to buy 20 copies of your book, right? And then they'll help. Then that's part of the contract that you have to buy your own books, like 20 of them, or you have to give them a forward of money or something like that. That's an easy way to recognize if it's a vanity publisher, because publishers should never ask you for money. That's the point of having a publisher, is that you're skipping that entire process. Is that an agent and a publisher like your work so much that they're willing to take on the responsibility of distributing it, using all that money and getting it out there to the world for you, so the author has absolutely no expenses in the process. So that's how you recognize a vanity publishers, if the author, for any reason, has to give their own money or has to give some sort of, charity or donation to the publishing house. And in that case, the competition is also very low because they'll accept anybody. And that's what they go for, is that authors will get so excited that someone's accepting the work when the publishing house didn't really even read their work and they're just trying to make money. All right, so literary journals. Now, this is a very relevant topic for today because of the digital world, and it wasn't actually even a thing. I would say probably 15 or 20 years ago, it was an emerging market, and people still don't know much about it, right? So online literary journals, if you focus on short stories, if you focus on like just doing exercises, turn them into actual stories, and look into publishing them on literary journals. Literary journals are basically online platforms that are sort of like online magazines where they publish tons and dozens of individual works in a volume of some sort, and they take submissions from authors from all over the world, from all over the country, and they might pay you for it, they might not, but it's always a good thing to get your name out there. So, for example, I wanted to show you Submittable, which is a notable literary journal submission platform online. I'll go through the website. But what they do is they basically help you find your style, your genre, because they're very individualized, right? So you could peruse the website, as you'll see, and you'll see some submission. You'll see literary journals with options for a certain genre like science fiction or fantasy or literary fiction, and you can tweak your work to fit into that specific literary journal, right? And it helps you find a niche. And some journals may not have a lot of submissions because of the genre, so you could write specifically for that journal, and you have a very good chance of being accepted. Right, so let me show you the website really quick, and I'll actually log into my profile to get a good insight. So I created this in around 2019, I believe. And okay. So as you can see, these are my personal submissions, right? So my first submission was in 2019. Now, this should give you a good perspective into how many rejections you're going to receive, right? Because not one journal accepted me so far, and it's been 2 years. But the benefit of this is that I was able to get my story out to over 20 different literary journals, right? So for example, if you go into Discover, you'll see a whole bunch of opportunities that some ask for a charge, but if you go to no fee through the filtering process, these are free um, online journals that are accepting submissions at this time, right? So let's click this one. Once you click it, it shows you welcome to the radio, new poets, and new poems. So this is a poem journal. If you write poetry, you can submit to them, and you have a good chance of getting accepted. They may put it in for the volume, and people, even if you get rejected, somebody read your work and somebody knows that you're out there. So that's the benefit of Submittable. I definitely recommend making a profile here. It just helps you keep in touch with what's being read currently, and also gives you opportunities to just play around with your submissions, see what people are reading, see what they say, because a lot of these guys give feedback as well. So it's good to get feedback on your writing and to learn basically what professional critics will say about it. Right? Even if they reject it, they'll give you key points on what they liked, what they didn't like, which is the main thing when you're trying to grow as a professional writer. You know how to get
If
back
you
to
alt
the-
tab, that's what it should get you back to the actual PowerPoint. Here you go.
Yeah, you want to do it?
I think I figured it out last time, but no problem.
Yeah.
And they also help you know your audience, right? So going through Submittable, for example, you'll see what sort of people read those specific journals, right? Because the journals will usually tell you who their readers are, and what the readers are interested in. So if you find that, all right, you know what, I'm not so good at writing at this, and I'm finding greater interest in writing in this genre for this audience, Submittable and other online platforms like Submittable help you narrow your gaze and help you discover what you're basically interested in as well.
Like also that knowing when you get to the publishing stage again, knowing your genre is extremely important because as we listed, just off the top of my head, we had Penguin and we had Orbit. Penguin specializes in more in literary fiction, standard fiction, historical fiction. Orbit specializes more in fantasy, science fiction. So when you're going to the publisher, just keep in mind that some publishers are very genre specific or have a lot of experience in a very specific genre. Listen.
Before you even get to the publisher, that's what the agent also, like I was showing you on the website, they also even tell you what they're interested in. So let's say you write science fiction, you could submit to an agent that focuses on nonfiction, but the chances of them accepting you are low. So you don't even need to, submit to a nonfiction writer if you're writing creative fiction and science fiction. It's going to take up extra time, and you could easily go on to the next. And then the last thing I wanted to mention are contests, because these are also something that a lot of people don't know about. And yes, the competition is very high. That's why they're contests. But the benefit of having a contest out there is because one, there's a lot of after first place prizes, and also because the reading pool is so high that the likelihood of someone noticing your work and remembering your work is going to be good too, right? You're going to have a bunch of professional critics and judges reading your work, and even if they might not get chosen, they're going to be remembering that you wrote it. They might even follow you on your platforms. They might reach out to you, and that happens more often than you think actually. Oh, they also help with deadlines, right? So if you think that you struggle with discipline, writing discipline, and you struggle with reaching certain deadlines in your writing, knowing that the contest is ending, for example, at the end of the year, you'll actually commit yourself professionally to the art of writing. You'll sit down, you'll say, you know what, I have until 31st of December to write this, right? Because writers, like any artists, we usually get stuck within ourselves, and we treat it more of a hobby. But if you're serious about pursuing it as a career, whether it's through fiction, creative, or nonfiction, you do have to have a sense of discipline and commit yourself to a schedule of one sort or another.
Also, if I may, going back to what I said earlier, especially because a lot of these are looking for short fiction or flash fiction, even with our brainstorming stuff I mentioned earlier, having a flash fiction already prepared, along with helping your writing, is essentially having prose ready to submit.
And the last thing is just talking about websites, right? So do you guys as writers have an online professional platform that you submit, that you either post your writing on or have followers or anything of that sort? No? Well, if you're interested in sharing your work eventually, I would definitely recommend doing that because it does, even if you have like 4 or 5 followers, that's still 4 or 5 people that are going to see your posts, right? So it's sort of like having an Instagram where you post photography, pictures, and things like that. Having an online platform for your identity as a writer is great for having people recognize your work and having people acknowledge the fact that you are serious about it. Especially when you do submit to agents and indie publishers, for example. One of the main things they ask for is an online platform, whether it's social media or a website, because they can easily peruse your website and see what how serious you are about it, how professional it looks, whether or not you have other work that they're interested in, things of that sort. So, go home and start making your own platform. If nobody reads your work, no one's gonna really know how good you are. Don't publish entire manuscripts, so don't put your entire work on these websites because then people will see it, they might steal it. You just don't want that sort of exposure on it. Just give summaries, excerpts, and talk about it. You can talk about it, but I wouldn't recommend putting entire Word documents. All right, so these are just additional resources that we had. Down here is the literary agency database that I had shown you, and we have Submittable as well. And then we actually have a couple of other resources that just quickly, yes.
I was gonna add, so I'll send everyone the link to the presentation.
Okay, all right, sounds good. Yeah, yeah. So yeah, these are all hyperlinks. You can just click on them. But for example, we have Book Riot, which shows you what's currently being read, and it gives you a good idea on what sort of literature is being.
This is also one of the benefits of Book Riot and places like Book Riot, along with showing you what is popular and what is new. It's also showing you, it's the vanity thing. It's showing you what covers are popular. I've worked in and around the book industry for a little while, and by industry I mean retail. But anyway, I know what people buy, and I know people do actually pick by cover, and some genres are more limited to cover than others, particularly fiction and young adult fiction. And if you don't believe me, go to any bookstore, look at the young adult covers, and tell me to tell them apart. But outside of that, we also have a second one called Book Life. It's essentially the same thing, which is a bit of diversity in that.
And then there's also YouTube channels that are sort of fun and informative videos that tell you, tips and things of that sort.
In particular, the two I've included in there are, general terrible writing advice might be the better of the two. He also goes through each genre, even outside of his own. He goes through different tropes, cliches, and how to get around them and use them effectively, but in a more fun, interesting way. And this is, I think, probably the biggest, most versatile tool, especially if you're writing fiction, is World Anvil, because this essentially lets you create interactive pages for your story. I'm not plugged yet by World Anvil. If anyone knows them, I'd like to give them a little bit of a explanation. But essentially, World Anvil lets you create Wikipedia pages for your story, for your characters. Originally made as a Dungeons and Dragons tool, but it has branched out into full novel writing software. And but yes, you can create interactive maps. The maps themselves then can link to pages about places, characters, ideas, concepts, and you just have this wealth of information and something that's not a Word document. You can even put this on your website. Some of the things you've made here, I think you may have to credit World Anvil. That should be a bit of bother. And more importantly, it looks professional. When you give this to an agent, they're not seeing a Word document. They're seeing something like that. So they know that you mean business. They know that this is real. This isn't just an idea. This isn't a hobby. This isn't someone writing on website. Even though surprisingly those are very successful. And there's also a few in the middle I've included there. Satirites, writing tips, so forth and so on. These are all actually Instagram pages, but I find that they're important because they're writing communities. I've engaged with these people personally myself. They get a lot of writing prompts, a lot of different ideas of writing, but it's always good to be involved with other writers, see what they think, just to feel more involved. And out of the two, I would say the most effective are actually Seth Wright and Tariq.
Yeah, networking is, it's part of any field. It's not just limited to artists or working professionals. It's something you have to do no matter what discipline you go into. And writers themselves also have a lot of opportunities through Instagram, through Facebook. They have their own groups, right? They have websites that you can be a member of. Reddit is a huge one for writers. They have groups where you just share your poems or something of that sort. People will give you genuine feedback for it. And it's trusted communities that people feel a part of. Reddit?
Reddit.
Reddit,
Okay,
yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, no, yeah. So Reddit, they have many dozens of different writing groups that you could, join and just.
Well, I was just gonna add like the non-traditional. Like, do you think I should include the non-traditional groups?
Yeah,
Outside of that, if you're interested in doing non-traditional fiction or not going through the publishing, there are other sites I know that, or there's also a lot of new ways to get involved. For example, for horror writers, there is you might have even heard about, there's the SCP Foundation. That is a writing project that anyone can contribute to, and your work becomes canon based on what the mods think, and then it gets a number. There's also and I think like Reddit, except this one you can't really save your work, but sometimes things do actually become very popular from there. Is like 4chan and the X board. There is also ways of using things like Instagram and YouTube for non-traditional story experiences. Those are becoming very popular, particularly analog horror, which is using things that feel old, like old information videos, and stretching that out into stories. People also do that with ARGs, embedding numbers, locations, things like that. There's non-traditional ways of engaging an audience as well, outside of the traditional publishing structure. But the major disadvantage of that is the few rare exceptions, you won't actually get to keep the work yourself. Like if you submit to SCP, there's no one owns it, so you just owned community-wise.
Yeah, basically, we live in the digital age, especially, more aware after COVID that anything is available online, right? So there's writers that don't even write for a living that are just interested on the side that will get together and share their work with each other. For about 3 years now, I've been a part of this writing group that meet almost weekly, full of writers that are above the age of 50 who have never really even written before, but they just found a great passion for writing. And I'm the youngest member there, but a lot of these people have amazing things to share, and they put it into writing, and they get together once a week. They all come from different paths of life and different careers, but for like 2 hours every week, they'll share their work and they'll get feedback from other people that are. So that's just an example that shows you, you have to build a community and you have to get in touch with other writers if you really want to grow, if you want to see how other writers see your work. So definitely you have to do some outreach in that. And yeah, so now we'll just open it up to any questions, any personal,
Any feeling that you suggestion.
you guys. So Twitter, there are possibly a lot of Twitter poetry pages that allow that bring in submissions and encourage people to post tweets and things of that sort. That would be the best way to go about it, because if you post it on your regular Twitter page, people that are interested in writing might just read through it. They might not look at it, but anyways, I would submit it anyways.
So there's like kind of go on Twitter, look for the pages that have that and message them.
Yeah, so some of them may ask for like an invitation or some join group. You could just post it on their page. The good thing about copyright in the digital world is once you post it, it shows the date. So if anybody else tries to, replicate it later on, you could show that I wrote it first.
That's always the scary part.
Yeah.
Like if I'm not posted on a social media page, but you can kind of easily set it, but
It could.
If you make like things specific enough, you shouldn't really have a problem. I've seen people do full prose stories through Instagram. But they've like, the one in particular I had in mind somehow did this through memes and Wojak and told a very compelling, very deep story. But if you make it specifically yours and make it something that's hard to steal, like not just prose and has a very specific aesthetic style, you should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, on my personal Facebook, a couple of years ago, I just started posting like short, stanzas and things of that sort, and people that I didn't even know started liking it. They found it through mutual friends and things of that sort, and it helps getting it out there, even if it's through just a random post or something of that sort. So yeah, if you have the desire to share it, just do it. Just don't think so much about it. Just share it. That's the first step, is just getting it out there.
You'd be surprised how many people will actually enjoy your work. It's like sometimes when you're writing, and this is something that I've experienced, it seems a little stale to you. You've also read it 1,000 times. But someone is reading it with fresh eyes, they have no idea who your characters are, they have no idea the twist that you know, so their reactions will be very different to you. And sometimes even their interpretations will be different. I know that sometimes my editor is surprised when I tell her things about the story that she didn't get on immediate, like first glance. And sometimes she gives me things I never even thought about myself. So engaging in that way, which is why I stressed earlier on having beta readers, having people you trust. That can be your editor, that can be friends. I think there actually are professional beta reading services. And some people when you can be like, yeah. But like sometimes there's people you'd be surprised who will actually accept submissions. There's a guy on YouTube who specializes in swords, but he also says he'll read people's submissions in fantasy to give them a historical reflection.
Have you ever heard of Rupi Kaur? Or you heard of Rupi Kaur? Yeah, so she's a modern day poet who started off actually just making Instagram posts, right? Her poetry, it's sort of polarizing. Some people like it, some people don't. Some people don't consider it poetry, other people do, because it's really just like one or two sentences um, of like her personal feelings, or it'll be like a statement towards something. But the fact that she was able to build such a huge foundation through Instagram and get multi-million-dollar deals with publishers because of her followers on Instagram, because of how popular she did with that, shows just how powerful the social media, the social media effect is. And it's a great representation of the modern day writing foundation, that we don't have to go through, such a long and thorough process if you have a strong community that believe in you.
To go along with that, Instagram is actually becoming an interesting platform for telling stories, because you can have very non-traditional, very short poetry and storytelling. You had her with her essentially. I've even seen some of her work. Sometimes it really is just a statement, might be a whole page, is a sentence. But going back to what I said earlier, it was a guy, and his story is called the Uriel Files, and each one is just a picture of a face, and then some prose about the characters. Sometimes just a two-sentence phrase, or sometimes even a two-word phrase, and the story is told through the changes in the character's face and the changes in the background. But it just shows you that there's so many different ways to get your ideas out there now. You can just engage almost any way you want, but there's certain benefits and drawbacks to that, and having the community and all that. But when you do it through Instagram, things like that, you won't be able to publish as effectively, even though I've seen a lot of comic creators do, especially with visual ones. They do eventually compile into solid book, which sells a lot. Oh, it's solid. I'm chatting,
But yeah. So with that in mind, you guys have any questions or thoughts for this?
I don't know how long it's like take to cover, but how does the journey change as opposed to writing poetry and literature for books? How is that different from writing from screenwriting stories? How is that different from how is the journey different if I'm from screenwriting?
Screenwriting is also a form of publishing and writing as well. For example, the agency database that I gave you, a lot of them actually look for screenplays, and they work with theaters, they work with cinemas, things of that sort. And there's agents for any type of writer, right? Because writing is such a versatile field. It is such a huge and diverse method, right? There's poetry, there's fiction, nonfiction. Some of the agents are even looking for thesis writers, things of that sort, that are going to college. So screenwriting is definitely included in the process that we were talking about, where you reach out and try to get published. Every writer starts the same way. They start, jotting the thoughts down that they want to share before. So I would say the journey is pretty similar.
I would agree. Fundamentally, you're going through many of the same steps, and especially creatively, it's very similar, at least from what my perspective. I've never actually done screenwriting per se. I've been told my prose has a very screen feeling, but you're still going through the same concept, the same world building, the same character-driven story, the same character building, a lot of like what you can use for like the tips I gave on fiction and character development can also apply to screenwriting. Also to poetry, but I haven't seen as many narrative poems recently.
The only difference I would say, is that screenwriting requires a different template and a different format. So, are you familiar with that already? Because you have dabbled with that at part or not?
I'm actually not too sure. I don't think so.
So screenwriting is, since you're writing more, for example, a play or dialogue, it's not written in the same form as a fiction work or a piece of literature. So I would do research. So a simple Google search on how to write a screenplay or something of that sort will give you a step-by-step process on how you can change something like let's say a short story that you've already written into a screenplay, right? So it'll tell you how you can change the dialogue into a format that is accepted by an agent who works with screenwriters.
It's like, well, at least from my experience, though, I do have some experience reading like a screenwriting prose. The difference is that screenwriting prose is a little very straightforward, but comparative to fiction. Fiction, you're trying to like make the prose seem beautiful and flow, and you don't want to get people to like this happened. For screenwriting, you will actually need this happen. It'll be dialogue, then what the characters did in very plain text, dialogue the characters did in very plain text. Sometimes not even in detail, sometimes it's vague because you're hoping on the actors to tell the rest of the story. As opposed to when you're writing fiction, your wording and phrasing tells the story.
Are you familiar with IMDb?
Yeah, actually.
They have a subscription called IMDb Pro. So if you want to write that down, what that subscription basically allows is lets you get in touch with agents of the writers for movies. So if you go to, let's say you click on a page recently, what was it recently, like Eternals, for example, right? You can go to the writers page from the IMDb page of Eternals, and you can look up their agent through that subscription, and that agent might be accepting screenplays or things of that sort as well. So that's a great database and a platform for it. You know, if you're interested in getting into movies or writing or films, I would definitely recommend getting IMDb Pro. It helps you. It opens your doors to not only literary agents, but to theater agents as well.
That kind of sparks a question for me. So what are your thoughts on like paid resources versus free resources? Like I was curious for World Anvil, is the entry free? Is it all free, or is there then like a paid pickup?
I think like they'll let you in for free, but for more advanced features, you have to pay a subscription. And again, I'm not paid by World Anvil, but just from what I know about the product, it's probably worth it. That being said, World Anvil is a tool meant for more than one thing. It started originally as a Dungeons and Dragons tool for people to see what people are playing in, but also then branched out into novel writing and kind of evolved from there. So for a novel writer, I imagine you could actually just go ahead and do the free version because the rest of the tools are meant specifically for playing a game.
So are you both doing some free resources and some
So
paid?
I've been doing a little bit of both, right? So free resources there's a lot of resources out there, but at the end of the day, they still will need to be sustained. So they will offer some sort of subscription or things of that sort. If you read the subscription, if things can be helpful, like the IMDb Pro, the only way to get in touch with those agents is through IMDb Pro. I would get it. I would think it's worth it if you're serious about the format, right? So Submittable, for example, they have some free submissions, but those submissions can take a month or two to get back to you, and they don't get feedback, right? Whereas some journals may say, if you give us a $5 submission fee, we'll get feedback to you within 2 days. That will give you a decision within 2 days as well, right? So in that case, it's worth the $5 because not only do you get a decision whether or not it's accepted, but you get professional feedback from critics and the judges that will tell you. You can go either way. And it depends on how your preference. Do you want to hear back? Do you not want to hear back? But yeah, I don't want to convince you to like pay or anything, but it comes down to how serious you are, how much you.
It's an unfortunate reality when it comes to writing that no matter how you get into it, you will have to pay somewhere along the line. Like I remember I saw when I first started, it was one of the things I looked up. The average fee of publishing a book is actually something like $1,500 just to get it out there, and that's all the different fees involved. Not so much for publishing, but the agent, the artist, the editor. Also, something else I've learned. I don't know if this is something that's universally true. Some publishing houses won't actually let you get your own artist for the cover; they pick your cover.
Well, you have to be careful with that. That goes back to the question of vanity publishing, right? If a publisher says you have to spend money to publish a book, then that's a vanity publisher. They're just trying to get money. The point of a publisher is that they're expediting the process, that you don't have to pay, right? You don't have to pay for the editing. You don't have to pay for the advertising. And they believe in your work so much that they're willing to take the expenses on. But if you're self-publishing, like if you're putting it on Amazon yourself, then yes, you're going to have to pay for advertising. You may pay some firm here or there to say, can you know, get my work up there. Amazon has opportunities that if you publish through Amazon as a self-publisher, if you, I think if you like pay them advertising fee, they'll put it on like the newly released page or something like that. So you know, payment really comes through how much much you're willing to invest to publishing.
Also, I do believe that. Yeah, question with that still.
Oh yeah, I wanted to ask something similar because like I do more writing like the journalism based, would that kind of like apply to what whole screenwriting kind of thing, like say platform format?
It's so there's always different formats for different types of writing, right? So journalism isn't so much about writing poetic, literal prose, right? You want to be direct, you want to be literal, and you want to go through platforms that focus distinctly in journalism, right? So you want to find agents that focus on journalistic agents. Actually, a very relevant genre right now is feminist journalism, right? So a lot of the agents on that website you see are looking for postmodern feminism, journalism stories, things of that sort, and they'll have their own formatting requirements. They'll tell you how they want inquiry letter to be, why, you know, what sort of stories you're interested in, things like that. So the process is usually similar, same way you go through the same resources, same research. The biggest difference is really in the formatting and the context that you will get in touch with. It's different.
Breaking up here, I just have a question about the concept. I know some of the discussion today was kind of like being careful of where you put it.
Yeah.
Is there like a safe way to know like what is the concept?
Yeah. So I would actually go through contests that are listed on actual platforms, right? So for example, I'll show you my submission. I just submitted my recent short novel to a contest through Submittable because I trust Submittable, and Submittable is an authenticated platform. And the master's review, for example, I'll go to submissions, master's review. Is an official review that are working through Submittable, right? Because they want authors to trust their submission, so they went through Submittable. And they'll send you an email through Submittable, thank you for sending the work. And the closing actually just closed today, so they're going to let me know in a few months. And they tell you everything through, you know, what they're offering, things of that sort. So, and then you know this is usually just to give you a good insight. This is usually what the submissions require. They require a bio, and then they require a quick summary of your story. So you should always have like a summary of your story and a bio saved on like a separate document that you can send to everybody. It's gonna be very redundant to like type one out for each individual submission. So just have those like saved separately.
If I also know, sometimes this is much more of a rare occasion, but this does happen. Sometimes publishing houses and story-specific publishers, because some franchises do actually have their own publishing houses, will actually send out competitions. You can usually trust those are legit because they're coming from big-name publishers and big-name franchises. Personally, for me, I actually did one through the Black Library, which only does one type of story. It only publishes from one type of, from one universe in particular of writing. So on occasion, you'll actually see things like that, but you would have to be writing not only in that genre, but in that set story already. So some people are interested in that. Some people are very like good at fan fiction. And this is a chance saying, hey, give me your fan fiction, you can have it published and make money off of it. And some people are very passionate about a universe like I was, and that's when I started writing for them. So they will usually get back to you, especially when they're doing competitions like that, because they have a smaller set of authors. And I lost, but I still kind of keep it as a hallmark that I got a message from them.
Yeah, that's just I want to jump on that for rejection, right? Because once you guys start this process, you will unfortunately receive a lot of rejections. don't let that demotivate you. You know, the thousands of people that you're basically competing with, that's what you're doing through getting in contact with agents and stuff. It's just part of the process. Like, you could see how many rejections I got, but I also was able to publish one in 2017, whereas other people weren't at that time. So it's just about getting your foot in the door, and you know, you'll get published, you won't get published, but eventually, you know, you're sharing your work at the end of the day. Somebody out there will like it. And I hope we answered your questions everything about my back. Yeah, so if you guys have any last minute questions.
I actually wanted to ask, can I just get like a photo of Instagram? Okay, perfect.
I can send you a couple of things.
Our style is all okay. Thank you guys.
Thank you guys so much.
Thank you. So, thanks for coming in. I hope you enjoyed the resources that we have.